Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Cathleen Scott podcast. I'm here today with a real powerhouse woman, and we are going to talk a little bit about her commercial real estate experience and background, and also going to focus on just women and equity and these ideas of pay and racial disparities. And we are here having this conversation in 2025, which I suppose is unfortunate, but is where we are. So let me just introduce my amazing guest today, which is Jamie Beale Howe. And Jamie, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here. So
Jamie,
great to see you.
You too. You have such an interesting background, and you've done the corporate thing, you've done the do your own thing.
Yeah.
And so really want to hear your perspective on, just how it is out there as a female in the workplace, like worrying about making sure you're getting paid what you deserve based on your experience and qualifications.
I will say the last few years have been life-changing for me. And a lot of it goes back to what I had been conditioned to believe, like what success looked like. So my background is in, marketing and Spanish, completely unrelated to commercial real estate, but nonetheless, I fell into it, which is a very white male-dominated industry. With publicly traded trusts. And so I spent 20 years of my life in my career in a commercial real estate space where you don't really see a lot of women at a certain level, and you certainly don't see a lot of people of color at a certain level. And so based on the Beales, my lovely parents, based on what they told me I should do in success, and I say that with love, they said, Jay, you get a corporate job, and you climb the corporate ladder, and you stay there for, 20, 30, 40 years. And that was their idea of that. And I did that. And, I floated around to different REITs, but they were all these publicly traded billion-dollar trusts for real estate. And I got to a certain level and looked around, and I'm like, well, I was the first woman promoted to a VP role. I was the first person of color, male or female, which I always say I'm not cool enough to have been the only one. But I got to a certain level and looked around, and that's when I started feeling isolated and iced out of certain spaces, and this lack of inclusion and actually just microaggressions and things that I can name now that I couldn't name then, but I know I felt devalued in certain spaces where I didn't feel like other people thought I belonged there when I got to a certain level. So that was kind of my impetus to pivot out. Oh, and I will say this, the higher up that I got, the more visibility that I got inadvertently to pay disparities between women and men and people of color and men. And I don't know.
So many things I want to ask.
Yeah, go.
Okay. So one is, I'd love to know your insight on the higher up you got in an organization. You say you got more visibility. I thought where you're going with that was you were going to say, and the company was saying, the first woman of color, the first da da da. So was that part of your experience too? And if so, how did you feel about that?
They weren't saying it verbally. It was evident and it was obvious, but one thing was happening is that I was on the website. And I started feeling like my identity was being used externally facing to say, look, we are diverse. We have one. We got a threefer, right? She's younger than the other people in those roles. She's Black and she's a woman. Like, look, of course we're diverse. So it wasn't verbal, but there were other things that led me to believe that maybe my characteristics were being used.
What advice would you have for corporations out there who might be listening, who want to celebrate diversity, but want to be sensitive to what you just described as kind of being like, you're no longer an employee that does a great job. You're now this person that is standing for all these things, and you're just there to like make a living, do a good job, and do great things. So what advice would you have for a company, how to kind of dance on that? It's a little bit like a dancing on the head of a pin, I think, when you're the company, because you want to do the right thing, you want to celebrate diversity, but you also want to be sensitive to people. People aren't just the color of their skin. They're not just the sex at their birth, right? Right. So how do we teach about, what do we say to them?
I think we tell employers, specifically people in leadership, because it trickles down, that training on biases, these unconscious biases, is necessary. I would also say that if you're in a leadership role, you need to be mindful that you co-create climates of inclusion. You can. Because in my situation, I would say, I don't feel like it was all done through a negative lens.
Sure.
I think they recognized to some degree the value that I brought, but I don't think that they took the time to train people on their leadership team about how to make people feel included, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So, because in my situation, it wasn't the CEO per se.
Right.
It were the people that were on the CEO's team. And I don't think he was tuned in enough to how his team was making others around them feel.
And I feel like workplaces kind of develop a culture, right? You know, we litigated that case against Walmart. We represent 1,100 women for pay and failure to promote and pay disparities. And one of the things I found so interesting in litigating the case is the owner of the company at the time, Sam Walton, who obviously has passed away since.
Right.
He had a friend, a golf buddy, a hunting buddy, you know, a family member, and that's who he put in charge of the next Walmart that he opened up. And so it was like, you know, Bob opened this Walmart as a general manager, and then, you know, Stu got this one, and then I'm just making these names up, and then Joe got this one, and then, you know, who it's like so and so got this one. And you know, I don't think that Sam sat there and said, Mr. Walton said, I don't want women to be in these roles, or I don't want people of color to be in these roles. I think in his experience, he was surrounded by people who were in his tribe that looked like him, that talked like him. And, you know, and so that I think getting to what your point is, how do we get companies to get that out, or at least create a system where that isn't what's going to permeate, right? Because bias creates more bias, and so on and so on and so on. And then fast forward 10 years, you have a company that looks like exactly like the owner and his family and no one else.
1,000%. Well, and yes, and that's the thing, like affinity bias. I just did a training on it this morning, and the affinity bias is we tend to gravitate towards people that remind us of ourselves. And so it's unconscious, but if we have that bias, and that's what we use to determine who's going to be promoted, who's going to be hired, nepotism is real. So people want to put people in places that they either know or think are like them because of their biases. Unless we check those, it's not going to happen. Unless employers are looking at their policies and procedures for language that is no longer appropriate in 2025, or having things in your office buildings that don't apply to everybody, that everybody can't use equitably. So I think it's a dual-edged sword. I think one is training to remind people that their biases are impacting their ability to see the true competence and characteristics of the individual. So I think that's important. And it's not one of these check the boxes. We did a training. Great. Everybody should be aware of their biases. Let's keep it moving. It's actually then implementing what you learn in those trainings into rewriting your policies and your procedures. I think that's a part that's missing as well.
You're right. Getting that subjectivity and taking it out. Right. And as you're talking, I'm reminded of that study that involved an orchestra where I don't remember which orchestra, but I want to say the Philharmonic, but I could be incorrect about that, where they had almost all white men in the orchestra. And so what they started doing was blind auditions where they would put people behind a curtain, and the individuals hearing the music couldn't see the person playing it. And what they discovered is that, wow, all of a sudden more women and people of color and different walks of life and different, you know, religions started to be hired. And now they're one of the more diverse orchestras. So to your point, like, I don't think anyone sets out to be like an absolute biased human being, but these things, like you say, are implicit. And so, yeah.
Absolutely. And, you know, I'll add this also, Kathy, that you asked, what can employers do to make sure that they just don't have a person there that they're using as a figurehead, so to speak.
Right.
I think it's actively participating in the programs that you roll out. So I work with a lot of organizations where they have these employee resource groups, or ERGs, or affinity groups, whatever you call them. There's a women's affinity group, and there may be a Black professionals affinity group, and there may be an affinity group for the LGBTQIA plus community. And so they roll out these programs like, okay, we're doing this. We're creating safe spaces for underrepresented groups to feel seen and to have psychologically safe spaces to have conversations. But then the only people participating in those groups are the people that are affected. So I think from an employer standpoint, don't just put these programs in place and say, all right, well, this is where the Black people can go talk about what's going on. And this is where, you know, our gay team members can go. It's being present to show that you are an ally, that you believe in the value that these groups are adding to your organizational culture. That's important because you can put them in place and say that's for them, not for us. But
Right.
if you are present and people can see you and then you weave into your corporate culture all of these things that you say you believe in, that's how you can kind of differentiate yourselves from being an organization that just has stuff versus an organization that believes in what you are actually doing.
Sit in the discomfort, right? Like just
Sit in the discomfort. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, that's excellent. That's excellent advice. It's hard to get people to do that, right? And it's now, so let's just pivot to the other big issue, which is, okay, so you're this employer, you're setting up all these great ideas, you're encouraging your management to sit in the discomfort and your other employees. So it's not just like, okay, just not more tribalism, right? Where this group goes to this meeting, that's an ERG,
Right.
but it's inclusive for everyone. Everyone feels a little uncomfortable, and hopefully that creates some good ideas and whatnot. But now we're living in a culture where even discussing DEI or even having that program, it starts to become political and maybe even against the law in the state of Florida. So
Right.
what do you say to that?
Oh, that's such a good question because, I've seen some organizations that say, we're just still going to keep going full steam ahead because we believe in it. But for those who are impacted through federal funding or any of these executive orders that are that impact your ability to generate income, if you will, I've seen some people change the language because here's what's happening. They have DEI itself, the acronym itself has become so politicized.
Yeah.
But it's really, if we think about it, not a new concept. DEI has been around, I say this all the time, since the 50s and 60s. It just had different names. In the 60s, it was Fair Housing Act. And that was a version of DEI. In the 70s and 80s, it's can we all get along? And I don't see color and all of those phrases that we were told to say that were polite, quote unquote. DEI itself is not new. But if we take the acronym out and say we are going to be an organization that celebrates diverse perspectives and people, we are going to be an organization that wants everybody to feel a sense of belonging and connection. We are an organization who is going to make sure that we are paying our employees equitably, and it's truly based on performance and not based on our likability biases or our affinity biases, but it's truly based on performance. Then those concepts no longer are part of the acronym that's gotten so much heat. It's literally a part of your corporate culture. And maybe you don't need to name it. Now,
Right.
there are some that say, I'm not shying away from it. I am going to name it. And I think both can be true, depending on your organization's culture. But ultimately, in my opinion, these corporations would be so much better. The world would be a better place if we just have if inclusive behaviors, if equitable practices of celebrating diversity of thought and perspectives are just interwoven into the way that we move through the world.
And they're good for business. I think this is the part that gets lost, right? It isn't just about doing the right thing. They happen to be the right thing, but it's also very good for business because your market, whatever it is you're selling to not just a part of the market that looks like you're selling to an entire community of people. And when you're inclusive in your hiring and your practices and your business practices, you're going to be more inclusive with your customers and your clients, I think.
1000%. People want to see people that look like them. Representation matters. And so, yeah, it's good for business. And also, if we think about costs within an organization, hiring and rehiring and training, that's one of the largest costs. The human capital aspect is one of the largest costs. So if you at the forefront create a space where everybody feels like they belong and I feel comfortable coming here, I don't have these microaggressions coming my way, I have a different idea, I don't buy into the groupthink, and I'm not censoring myself and I'm saying, you know what, that's a great idea, but the $1 million idea may be rooted in us thinking about it this way, then yeah, I'm creating a space where people don't want to leave. People don't leave organizations just for the sake of leaving. They leave because of culture and toxic work environments. So if it's safe.
Yeah. And to get there, organizations really do have to foster an organization that's like open to feedback. We call it radical candor in our office. We want to have people who can be radically candid with one another and a safe space to just transparently say exactly what it is they want to say in a nice way, constructive way. You don't have to even be friendly about it. You just have to be, it has to be direct and specific and not just like an attack, right? But we want to create that open feeling where feedback is a gift, because somehow we're brought up to believe that when someone gives you feedback, your instant response is to be defensive or to be like, that's not true, or angry. And so I think that's the first hurdle, right? Like creating a space in an organization where people can actually share feedback with one another, where you can be transparent, but also not feel attacked. And that's not such an easy thing to do.
It's not. I love the radical candor that you mentioned, Kathy. I've seen that. I think it's Amazon. Don't quote me on it, but I think it is Amazon that has this thing called the celebration of errors, where if someone makes a mistake, you celebrate it, and then you kind of dissect it and say, okay, what did we do? What could we do differently next time? And then you celebrate it because it's a learning opportunity. And so that way people don't feel like, oh my God, I made a mistake, I'm going to be fired next week.
Right.
Now we're going to celebrate that error, that mistake. Now, if you keep doing it, it'll be a different conversation. But we're celebrating errors. We're learning from that. We're open to feedback. If we have those conversations.
One way that you can create that environment, I think, from a business standpoint, is to have a meeting where everyone participates. And they just, and it's like, and then you set the ground rules, right? We're here, feedback is a gift, and to say things that actually mean it. And even have the owners and the managers of the organization hear things and be like, thank you so much for that. And then parrot it back. That's like just a simple step that we can do as business owners, as individuals who work in communities and workplaces, just to be like open to the idea that when people give you feedback, it's not an attack. That's step number one. Just hear it. Mm-hmm. You don't have to agree with it, but you can hear it, and just creating a space where people can actually share ideas, where even if they're unpopular, they have a value just in the fact that you value the person who's sharing them. Even if, and just have that. I feel like the whole world could use that lesson right now, to disagree, but not be disagreeable, right? Like that'd be such a great thing.
Absolutely. But I think you hit the nail on the head, Kathy. It's about setting a psychologically safe space where I feel comfortable giving feedback and I feel comfortable receiving feedback. But that tone has to be set, like you said at the beginning, through ground rules.
And through management. You mentioned something about, pay earlier, and when you were describing the importance of having an equitable workplace. I did a little search before our podcast today. There are over 13 states that currently have pay transparency laws, making it required that when you have a position that's being posted or hired, that the pay range is posted. I kind of feel like this is a scary idea in some ways, but also kind of brilliant, because now everyone knows where everybody stands.
I think it's brilliant. I think it greatly eliminates the risk of someone being egregiously underpaid for having the same position as someone else. But I think it's twofold. I think it's great to have visibility and transparency around ranges, but I also think it's imperative that the organization sticks to that.
Well,
because I've seen it where, an organization has done this overhaul of their compensation structure, and they put ratings in place, they put grades in place, kind of like a government system where there's like a number assigned to you depending on your level,
right,
and then a range associated with your performance within that level based on your performance reviews. If you earn a 4 or higher, you're considered an A performer. So within this pay range, you're on the higher end. And they laid it out beautifully, but then they didn't stick to it. And so, yes, I think visibility around roles can help a lot. And I think an organization actually sticking to that will keep.
So it used to be in the old days, you never talk about your pay. You would never know what another employee was paid in your organization. I feel like a lot of this is a tribute to Lilly Ledbetter, who is like one of my civil rights heroes. Lilly Ledbetter worked for an organization for something like 18 years, got injured doing a repetitive stress job. And when she was on workers' comp, her coworker, a male who had the same job as her, was like, "Why is your wage payment so low while you're out?" And she's like, "Oh, this is 66% of my salary." And he's like, "That's a lot less than what I get." And so she learned through this crazy happenstance way why she was being paid less. And at the time, Lilly Ledbetter has an act of Congress named after her for all of her work trying to change the law. Wow. But she raised the point that was really important. people can't know they're being paid less unless it's transparent. And then it used to be that when a female or would bring a claim under the EPA for equal pay, the court would look at it and say, oh, well, if you didn't bring it after you got that first paycheck that was discriminatory, it's time barred. So you have this so there's policy saying your pay is confidential. You have this very limited amount of time to bring the claim or it's kicked out. And so how would anybody ever bring these pay claims? They kind of became like, there was like a solution, but you could never take advantage of it, right? And so the Lilly Ledbetter Act, first law signed by President Obama, which is kind of a cool fun fact, makes it so that the claim for equal pay is triggered when you learn about it. And so that's a nice little change. And then coupled with these these pay transparency laws that require organizations to actually publish what they pay and publish the pay ranges, I feel like maybe disinfectant, sunshine, what's that saying, is the best disinfectant? I mean, maybe this was a way we get to a place where we can actually know. Because, sometimes I have conversations with people about equal pay and they go, I don't think there's an equal pay issue in our country.
Really?
They say, I don't think that's true. I don't know. Is there data on that? And it's like, yes, there's data on
yes.
that.
Send me your email address. I'll email it all over to you. Thanks.
But even today, like I said, having this conversation in 2025, it's real. I just saw a study the other day that even it was 75%, now it's 80. So we're closing the gap a little bit between men and women, meaning that women get paid about 80% the same as a male for the same job. It sounds like the gap is getting a little smaller, maybe. But here's an interesting thing. The recent statistic I saw said that remote work is becoming like another way to let those biases bleed back in, because there are more women, because of childcare issues, who stay home and work remotely, and that is being considered outside of the traditional pay band for that job that they're doing. And because they're working at home, they're falling into a lower pay category. And so now remote workers are kind of still being paid a little bit less, I think.
Well, see, I think that hits on this concept of intersectionality, which is like the intersection of all parts of our identities that inform the way that we, engage with people. But to that example that you just shared, with women being at 80% to the dollar, 80 cents to the dollar compared to men. But then you have to dissect that stat a little bit more, because we're saying all women generally are at 80 cents. But then if you look at, well, what does that mean for a Black woman? What does that mean for a Latina woman? What does that mean for an Asian woman? What does that mean for a white woman? So other parts of our identity, the intersection of all of those, can still show up in different experiences. So yes, women may be underpaid, but then if you break down the other parts of our identity, there may be a pay disparity even within the group of women, which I've seen. I got to get that stat, but when I was on the board of CREW, Commercial Real Estate Women, we were talking about the pay disparity in commercial real estate versus men and women. And then there was a stat that broke them down even more that said, well, women are, let's just use your stat, 80 cents to the dollar, but Black women are at 70 cents. Latina women may be at 74 cents. An Asian woman may be at 78 cents. So I just highlight that because we still have to take into consideration this intersectionality.
That's an important point. Yeah.
Yeah. Even with the
Absolutely.
remote work, that's still a part of someone's identity, or it could be, it's still a part of their culture. So if you're saying that you're seeing a pay disparity between remote workers, which tends to lean towards women, that's another part of that intersectionality that should be considered as well.
And I'm sure we've all read the studies that show that women they're less likely to ask for a raise, and they tend to accept the initial offer and don't negotiate for it. So for our listeners out there, let's give them some good tips. If you're navigating your pay raise, I like to tell people, when men, women, everybody who's an employee, if you're asking for more money, my suggestion is link it to something that's a metric that you can do that to demonstrate performance. And to the extent that you can have your pay can be based on actual performance and production, based on just some arbitrary number, like a salary or an hourly rate that someone just assigns to you because that's what your company thinks you're worth. If you can transition into a production-based salary, you're likely going to get paid more, but also you're going to have a pay scale that's based not on people's biases, but it's based on your actual production. What say you on that? Any tips for people out there who want to make more, want to be treated fairly?
I think I'm speaking generally. Women have been conditioned, again, generally speaking, have been conditioned to be humble and not to brag and not to talk about ourselves. And I've seen this movement with women saying, you know what, bump that. We need to brag. And it's okay. And bragging has a negative connotation, but I'm using it in the sense of reminding people of all of the experience and the education that we have. So if we are advocating for ourselves, yes, come with a metric that you can say that's measurable, and it's okay and it's uncomfortable, but it's okay to remind people of your experience within different organizations that ties to what maybe you may be able to do more at this organization based on what you've done historically. It's okay to remind people of your educational background. It's okay to remind people of your professional designations and certifications. It's okay to remind people of all of the things that you were able to do, your ability to multitask, your ability to collaborate. But I think we've, generally speaking, have been told, be humble, do your work, and your work will speak for itself. And I have found that that is not true all of the time.
Right.
So it's okay to remind people of how dynamic you are. And I think we need to change the narrative.
Add to that, it's an excellent point, and I would add to that, ask the question of your boss. What can I do to position myself to be in a place? I really want to increase my income. I really want to increase my promotional opportunities and self-growth. Like, ask the question, what can I do to position myself to get that job, to get that next position up, to get that next raise, and have them give you the metrics so that we're playing from the same, from the same field. Yeah.
And memorialize it. I think if there's
Excellent.
anything I learned is to memorialize it. If you have a conversation, I love that, Kathy, with your boss, and you say, listen, I really feel like I'm doing an amazing job. I think that that's reflected through the performance reviews that you have given to me, and in 360 reviews, what my peers are saying about me. And I think that's great. I am ready for the next challenge, and I want to set some stretch goals. What can you give me some guidance? What do you need to see from me to be considered for this role? And as soon as he or she tells you what it is, write it down, memorialize it. And then when you hit that, which you will, then you use that to continue the conversation when it's time for pay increases or mid-year adjustments or whatever your organization does.
Promotions, even too. Same thing applies for promotional opportunities. Well, this has been excellent, Jamie. What I like about you is you have such an interesting background and experience, but also you're kind of walking the walk too right now in your current role. So tell us about what you're doing in your current role, in your current job.
Thank you, Kathy. I always say that leaving corporate America was one of the scariest things that I've ever done because it's what I knew. And it was the most empowering thing that I could have done for myself. Just a little bit about me. I was about to turn 40 and pregnant with my first kid. So there was a lot going on at that time, who will be 5 here soon, which is crazy. But anyway, but I decided, you know what? How do I leverage that 20 years of corporate real estate experience? But instead of being myopically focused on the bottom line, which a lot of organizations are, how do I pour back into the human capital, which is our biggest asset? So there are two components to my firm, which is JBH Enterprises. One component is inclusive leadership development. So I work with organizations on how to truly be inclusive. I do assessments on cultural competence, which without the fancy words, pretty much saying, how do we truly engage with people? And how do I increase my capacity to engage with people who do not share my cultural beliefs? And not culture just being race and gender, culture being my perspectives and my values and my beliefs. So I work with boards and leadership teams on truly building an inclusive culture, using assessments as framework, and then putting real goals in place on how to create this culture where everybody can show up authentically. And I tapped back into my commercial real estate background. I am a commercial realtor and advisor. And so I also provide strategy and guidance to small business owners who want to find a piece of commercial real estate to run their businesses from, and for women who want to invest in commercial real estate, but just don't know how to do it. We aren't always in those rooms. So I actually help people understand how to invest in commercial real estate, the best asset class for you to invest in, how to use that to build generational wealth, and then how to protect that through insurance and through trusts, which I don't do, but I have partners, and then to protect your legacy going forward. So inclusive leadership development and commercial real estate guidance to help business owners find the place to run their businesses from, but then to pass that legacy through. So
love it. I love it. And when, the workplace is getting smaller, not bigger, right? In terms of like the number of applicants that are out there. And I think you're offering a service at a time where everything's getting a little tribal, right? People, it's sort of everyone's in a camp, one camp,
yes.
And what you're trying to do is really get people to see that when you don't have to be in a camp. We can all coexist in one workplace. In fact, I think that gives employers more opportunity to hire more talent that way, right? If they have a less tribal workplace.
Absolutely. And then for some that say, you know what, I'm tapped out of the corporate environment and I have a great business idea and I have someone that has helped me with the business plan. And I've been running this business kind of as my side gig. And now I'm ready to step into my greatness and have it be my full-time job. And you run that business from your house for a couple of years and you say, you know what, I've grown. And this is amazing. And now I'm ready to find an office condo or an office building or a multifamily unit. But I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to buy it. I don't know where to go. So that's when I also come into play and say, let's talk about the goals for you and your business. And let's find the real estate that will help you align with those goals. And then you keep that investment in your family, you protect it, you build your legacy and generational wealth through real estate ownership and investments. But on the commercial side, which we don't talk enough about.
That's true. Amazing. It's been wonderful to catch up with you and hear about all the exciting things that you're doing. Keep up the good work, and we appreciate having you.
Thank you for inviting me to come spend time with you. It's great to see you. So
you too.
Thank you. And thank you for all that you do to keep fighting the good fight.
Thank you. And it sounds like your son's almost old enough to go to kindergarten now. Is that right? Is that the big, that's good stuff. That's good stuff.
He's in pre-K 4. So they have their moving on ceremony on Friday.
Oh my gosh, you're going to cry. You're going to cry. Yep.
Oh, I'm sure.
Yep. Bring the tissues.
But it's a reminder of how quickly life moves. And I always say this to people that we don't always have control over the day that we come into this earth. If you think of our headstone, the day we come onto the earth, Lord, we don't have any control over that. The day that we leave this earth, more often than not, we don't have control over that. But we do have control over is the dash between those two dates. And so we can maximize the time that we have here and maximize each day, which for me means really spending time and being intentional and present with LJ and with my family and friends, because I have control over what I do in my day to day, so that my legacy will be poured into my son so that when I'm not here, he can carry that on. But maximize your day. I will say that. Maximize what we do with our day to day. That's the only thing we have control over.
Well said. And hopefully one day you'll have the pleasure of working with your son that I do. Dylan, I don't know if you know Dylan is my son.
No,
I feel so blessed every day that I get to spend time with my son in this capacity where he's basically producing and designing this podcast for me. So it's so fun. What a gift.
Did not put two and two together. Such a gift. That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that.
Thank you so much for tuning in to the Cathleen Scott podcast. We hope this was fun and informative. We'll catch you on the next one. You can find us online at scottlawteam.com or floridalaborlawyer.com. Thank you for joining.